And to testify to that more eloquently than I can, I want you to know a Colorado Christian University student of today, someone who interns with us in the Centennial Institute office, and someone who's headed for Tampa as a Republican National Convention page from Colorado. Welcome up, please, Erin Shoemaker, and with her, a Colorado Christian University student of tomorrow. This is Kelly Klaus. Kelly just graduated high school in her hometown of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She's coming to CCU to play basketball this fall, and she's got a little surgery that's got her on 1.5 feet to get ready for a great basketball season. Kelly has known Star as Ms. Parker has come to Iowa in the convention and caucus wars over the years, and I want Kelly to say a word about Star Parker, and then she will be formally introduced by our own Erin Shoemaker. Kelly Klaus, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to share how our next speaker has had an impact on my life. When I first met Star Parker 5 years ago, I was not prepared for the energized, flamboyant, passionate woman of God spewing stories and ideas a mile a minute. But once I caught up with her, I realized my immediate respect and admiration for her unyielding courage to stand up and always fight for her beliefs. It's a bravery I hope to achieve one day. And now I'll introduce Erin Shoemaker, who will welcome our Star Parker to the stage. Erin?
I refused to go back on welfare. There was no way I would look backward or listen to the leftist lies that sought to discourage me from even trying. In her book, Uncle Sam's Plantation, How Big Government Enslaves Americans Poor and What We Can Do About It, Star Parker drives home the point that the very policies that are supposed to be helping the poor are in fact what are holding them back. Programs such as temporary assistance for needy families and food stamps create a culture of dependency free of responsibility and of consequence. Welfare perpetuates reliance on such measures as a means of living and erodes any form of a code of conduct. Live for the moment, forget the consequence. Star herself can speak from experience. She was exposed to welfare when she moved to California as a young woman. She had a small child to take care of. The government became her option. Free money, and all she had to do was keep the baby. After 3 years of collecting these checks, however, she realized one day while in church that she had a responsibility to care for herself and for her daughter, not to just ensure that they could just scrape by. It was then that she turned her back on welfare and said, "Never again." Star Parker is now the founder and president of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, a nonprofit think tank which promotes market-based public policy to fight poverty. She earned her business degree from Woodbury. She uses her firsthand experience to show Washington and the rest of the country that the transition from government dependency can, in fact, be done. She frequently speaks on Capitol Hill and is a nationally syndicated columnist distributed through Scripps News Service, which reaches over 7 million readers worldwide. She even ran for Congress in 2010 to represent California. In her spare time, when she has some, she enjoys spending time with her grandchildren in California and riding her bike through DC when she's in the area. I am delighted to introduce Star Parker to you this morning. She is an exceptional woman who has challenged me to rethink the way that I look at poverty and the government policies that try to fix such a broken system. She will inspire you to do the same. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Star Parker.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I have one little announcement to make, though, before I get started in my remarks to Dr. Stephen, if he's still here. His name was Wayne Wheeler. And the reason I wanted to make that announcement is that as arriving here on Friday, I ran into some lovely folks that are with us from Texas, but they're originally from this area and still have property here. They're in the summit right now, Dr. Stephen, his son Steve, and his wife Jan. And we were talking about the amendment that was repealed to the Constitution. In fact, they said a trivia question, which one was? And of course, my 55-year-old brain didn't know at that particular moment. But when he told me it was the 18th Amendment, the one for prohibition on alcohol, I said, well, did you know that this is a story of a committee of one? What one can do to make a difference. There's one man who made sure that alcohol was abolished out of our society, led that to the point where it even became the 18th Amendment. So, of course, then he wanted to know the name of that person. In my Google search, I found, again, his name is Wayne Wheeler. But what I also found out, doctor, is that it was a committee of one woman, a Republican woman, who made sure that that was repealed. I am so honored to be a part of your conference today. I've heard about it. I've known John for a while. He's invited me before, and I absolutely am honored to be able to come in and share some conservative principles with you and some of my thoughts and ideas during the same time that President Barack Obama decided he was going to come to the great state of Colorado to remind us of why what we are confronted with this year is so important in this country, how we're extremely divided, and we need some solutions to finally come out of Washington, D.C. to represent our government in a proper fashion the way that we were designed. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Star Park, as you heard, and for 25 years I've been in public life. Folks who know my story know that as a young woman, I was on welfare. And in fact, my bio did a little justice to say how I ended up there. Frankly, I just believed the lie of the left. I believed that my problems were somebody else's fault, that the poor were poor because the wealthy were wealthy, that America was inherently racist, so why bother to mainstream? This was the voice of all that said that they represented my interests because they wore the same color skin I did, and I bought that lie, the same lie we hear today. It wasn't until after a Christian conversion that I just totally changed my life. I ended up back in college, as you heard. I got a degree and I started a business. And after the '92 Los Angeles riots destroyed my business, I knew I wasn't going back on welfare. I'd by then seen the hand of the Lord work in my life, and so I continued to move forward, and that's how I became more engaged in public policy. A lot of the details of my story are in my book that's available later on during the book signing, Uncle Sam's Plantation. I actually wrote my autobiography as well. I'm not sure that's here. It's called Pimps, Whores, and Welfare Brats, just to give you an idea of the kind of life that I was delivered from. And actually, there are a lot of information that is not in that book because I wasn't sure about statutes of limitations, so I didn't want to end up the rest of my life on jail after working so hard to get to the point where I could serve the Lord. I had opportunity in the 90s to work on welfare reform, and that's when I founded my organization, CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, the policy think tank that looks at market-based solutions to fight poverty. I launched the work of CURE because I knew firsthand that the political promises of entitlement sold into our minority communities caused generations to become pathologically dependent on centralized planning and government programs. I concluded, like most Americans, that we needed people in Washington, D.C., who would fight consistently to restore our founding principles of traditional values, because choice loses its meaning if it doesn't matter what you choose. Principles of limited government, because the role of government is to protect our interests and our property, not to plunder and to pursue it. We needed people in Washington who understood free markets, because profit is not only moral and good, but without profit, there is no capital to invest in tomorrow's interventions and to create jobs. And we also need people in Washington who understand a strong national allegiance and defense. You know, you've heard a lot of discussion about multiculturalism this weekend and the damage that it has done to us as a nation, to balkanize us, to where we have now generations of our youth who do not understand American exceptionalism and the principles of this great country. My life story embodies American exceptionalism, that anyone from any background, any ethnicity, anyone that just needs to be born again and start afresh can begin in this great country of ours. And to realize their dreams. I remember one time I met we were having discussion about the challenges in the Middle East and some of those nations that insist that they hate us. He said, you'll find out how much they really hate us if you walk through the crowds of the mobs with green cards to America, and all of a sudden you'll be swarmed with lines of people that want one. This is a great and exceptional country. But I also have concluded over the last few years of recognizing and understand more about public policy and personal psyche that this whole notion of redistribution of wealth is inconsistent with the founding of our country. Our country was founded in principles of freedom and personal responsibility. But as well, this idea of redistribution of wealth, socialism itself, is inconsistent with Scripture. When you think about the 10th commandment, it says, do not covet. And socialism is rooted in covetousness. Somebody has something somebody else doesn't have. Covetousness, wanting somebody else's property. Someone has something someone else doesn't have, so we go hire politicians to take it from them. That's theft. Violates another commandment, the 8th, because the IRS is not sending out letters to people saying, how would you like to give to this poverty program so that Star Parker can watch her life unravel into a little dark hole, or so we can continue the zombie of mess that we've made in the 4,000 housing projects that we've set up across this country in the name of helping the poor. No, when the IRS sends you a note to help redistribute your wealth into these so-called poverty programs, it's theft, because they don't give you a choice. They will take you to jail if you say no. Unfortunately, it took economic collapse to get Main Street to start thinking about the state of affairs in our country. And I was very grateful when in 2009, a Tea Party movement arose in our country to talk about socialism, because I'd already talked about socialism in my second book, Uncle Sam's Plantation. 10 years ago, I wrote this book to tell my story of what I saw living inside of welfare and about my transition out. I said in that book that socialism is a reality in every inner city in this country and has been since the Great Society social experiment of the 60s. I talked about the vast sea of perhaps well-intended government programs. Some say they were well-intended. In my research, I'm finding that liberalism is never well-intended. But many of these programs were initially set in motion in the 30s that promised to lift blacks out of poverty. Instead of solving the economics of black, the problems that were result perhaps of created in the history of slavery and Jim Crow, government programs created monstrous moral and social problems in this community. The kind of problems inevitable when individuals turn responsibility of their lives over to others. When you think about what has happened in these communities where they've been convinced that their problems are somebody else's fault and they start to depend on government, we end up with monstrous social problems. The legacy of American socialism is our blighted inner cities, our dysfunctional government-run schools, and our broken black families. I had the privilege of working on welfare reform, as I told you, passed by a Republican Congress and signed into law by a Democrat president. A few years after enactment, we saw the welfare rolls drop in half. I thought then that we were on the road to moving socialism out of our poor black communities and replacing it with wealth-producing American capitalism. I thought truth had won, that all were created equal, and it meant just that. Thus, I began working to promote school choice and personal retirement accounts to help break the cycle of generational poverty. But incredibly, by 2001, we began going in the opposite direction. Power changed political parties, but control stayed in Washington. Government expanded in many areas, but the biggest affront to my work was the faith-based initiative, this multi-billion tax incentive to put America's churches on welfare. By 2008, power changed political parties again, and by 2009, instead of poor America on socialism becoming more like rich America on capitalism very rapidly became like poor America on socialism. Major industries were being just boggled down with government, bailed out, and government controlled. And in fact, it was interesting, as these transitions were going on, I'm in Washington, I work there full time, I live in California. People think that's a long commute, but frankly, if you're ever on the 405 freeways in California, you realize that actually flying across country is a lot easier to get your work done than to go up and down that freeway. But As you start seeing the people that were coming back out to Washington, some of the even Christian organizations that had to begin to hire lobbyists to protect their interests, it was incomprehensible what was going on. I'd always been for the underdog, but I never thought the underdog would be bankers and Wall Street executives and doctors and others that needed protection now from the heavy-handed government. Socialism gripped America's poor minority community some 45 years ago, and now, as many are realizing, the social engineering of the political elite in Washington contributed greatly to the cultural and moral collapse and the economic chaos that we are confronted with today in our society. At root of America's fiscal problems is government dependency. Today, 70% of non-defense tax intake is a transfer to individuals. 70% of non-defense tax intake is a transfer to individuals. Today, 47% of Americans are in some way government dependent. Today, 40% of all births are paid for by Medicaid, and Medicaid pays the bills of 60% of all long-term nursing home care. Means-tested welfare programs. The means test, for those that don't know the terminologies out of Washington, D.C., they're the rules that they set up when they're stealing other people's money, not to just arbitrarily give it away to somebody who might not deserve it. So the rules of welfare are don't work, don't save, don't get married, and we'll kind of keep you enslaved to this poverty plantation. Well, those mean-tested programs are costing American taxpayers about $500 billion federal dollars today and another $200 billion in the states annually. The entitlements that we know need reform, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, are about $700 billion annually now, and unfounded liabilities of about $70 trillion. And some are saying that those are low estimates. When you have 10,000 people every day turning 65 years old, there is no way that we can go on the way that the structures and institutions in this society are right now. When you have 48% making and 47% taking, we're at a crossroads in this wonderful country of ours. You know, I was just talking to my colleague who does most of the research for my organization, CURE, to see what Gallup was saying about the decision on health care this week, what the American people actually are telling Gallup that they're saying, and we're split right down the middle. 46% like it, 46% don't. And what was interesting when the Gallup asked them about repeal, what percentages wanted to repeal 100%, and those numbers are down to about 30%. 70% say that we like some aspects of government control in our lives. There's a lot of work that we need to do, those of us that are in this room, the committee of one. The glaring truth underlying our economic collapse is that liberalism does not work. Uncle Sam's plantation didn't work for blacks, and it won't work for the middle class. In just 50 years, blacks went from 70% of children being raised in married households to 70% of children being raised in single-parent households today. When Reagan became president, 18% of births were outside of marriage. Today, out-of-marriage births are at 40%. Blacks are at 72%, Latinos are at 53%, and whites, while during the 60s were at 3%, today they're just under 30%. We can't go on like this. In the 60s, 75% of American adults were married, compared to around 50% today. When you have social thinkers like Charles Murray, libertarian social thinker who gave us Bell Curve and Losing Ground, coming up with a book called Coming Apart, you know we're in crises. When you have Charles Murray, a libertarian, pointing to the morality of our country, as de Tocqueville did, and marriage and the importance for us to hold ourselves together as a community of people. So the first question we should be asking ourselves when we're looking at political affairs is not how to elect Republicans. The first question we should be asking ourselves is what's wrong with our country? Then we should ask ourselves the answers to these questions. And then we should make sure that those we support for elected office agree with the answers to how we are going to fix the problems that are tearing our country apart. What is wrong with our country today is that we are no longer putting up the building according to the blueprints. Our nation was designed to be a free nation under God, but we have lost our way. Our nation is increasingly worshiping Washington rather than the Creator, and now we are paying the price. Every part of our country untouched by government is going great. Look at our iPhones, our iPads, everything. In fact, we were talking just a moment ago in the back as you were looking at the video of the destruction of the fires and the personal lives that have been displaced as a result, and some even in mourning as they have death now. And the first thought came to my mind when we were thinking about how to take materials out of your home or what you would grab first. I started thinking about the power of those little iPads we have, and now we can put absolutely everything in there, so we only have one thing to grab next to our lipstick. And our little grandbaby pictures can be on there too, so a couple of things, that's all we need, okay, and we'll be just fine. Where we see innovation and productivity untouched by government, things are going fine. Our problem is where we have let government take over our lives. The federal government now takes 25% of the American economy. Out-of-control debt, enslavement to government, and broken families is no formula for a great country. But the good news is that we can change. But where we have serious challenges, there needs to be serious work done. And so I'm going to talk about one aspect of the big problem, and that is the challenge with minorities, blacks and Hispanics. Getting our message of freedom into our hard-hit communities should be at the top of the list of priorities for conservatives. This country is becoming less and less white. And liberalism is the only message being sold into our minority communities for the last 50 years. Conservatives are not going to be able to move this nation toward building according to our constitutional blueprints without doing a better job with blacks and Latinos. When Reagan was elected president, 88% of the electorate was white. In 2008, 74% of the electorate was white. And this trend is continuing. And in fact, I just saw recently the data for the replacement rates. This should be alarming to you, and I'm an optimist, but this should be alarming to you. That replacement rate, how many children you have to replace yourself as a people group. The replacement rate is 2.1. Latinos are at 2.4, blacks are at 2.1, and whites are at 1.7. If we are going to save this great country of ours, we've got to get buy-in to the communities that don't understand American exceptionalism and why we believe what we believe. And without blacks and Hispanics understanding Americanism, it is going to get harder and harder to elect Republicans. And without blacks and Latinos or Hispanics, or whatever political term you want to put on this vast people group that are being political pundits and used by the left to try to make goody points to expand government, it will be harder for Republicans that do get elected to do the reforms that need to get done, the reforms that our nation needs. The good news is that these reforms that we talk about, these are ideas that are necessary in these hard-hit communities. Low-income Americans need them more than anyone else. And in fact, when I had an opportunity to talk to some of the students that are at this beautiful school and as well are considering coming in a little bit yesterday, I told them that you hold your head high when people say that you're not about social justice, because we are social justice. Because when you look at the data about who Republicans are, those in the white community that attend church on a regular basis consider themselves Republican. And people that go to church on a regular basis are the most benevolent in our society. Over and above the $400 billion that the government forces out of their pocket to pay for these poverty programs, they give away another $300 billion in this country alone, and then another $300 billion internationally. We are social justice. It is those that are going to church on a regular basis. It's those that go to church on a regular basis that volunteer and fund our homeless shelters and our maternity homes and our crisis pregnancy centers. They're the ones in the trenches, the decent people in quiet communities serving their God. And they're the ones under attack today. And that's the reason that we fight, and we will continue to fight. But we are needing to get buy-in from our Latino and black brethren, because they need our help most to get their children out of these cesspools we call public schools, where they are trapped. They're the ones that need to be able to build wealth by funding private retirement accounts instead of paying payroll taxes. And they need even more than many even in this room that are just repulsed by the notion of Obamacare. When you think about our hard-hit and poor communities, they already have the heavy hand of government controlling their health care, 100%. And in fact, I had opportunity one time to go on that show, The View, to do one thing, which was to ask Michael Moore one question about his movie, Sicko. Why did he go to Cuba and Canada to see socialized medicine? He could have gone to Compton or Camden. You can go to any inner city in this country and see what happens when the government controls health care. These folks need, even more so than middle America, the higher quality, lower cost health care that can only be made available in a market-based environment. But right now, blacks and Hispanics only hear from liberals. Left-wing organizations get hundreds of millions of dollars in funding from left-wing foundations and unprincipled American corporations to pump left-wing lies into these communities. Their children are indoctrinated in these government-controlled schools, and they get their news from ABC, NBC, CBS, Univision, and MSNBC. Americans who care about the future of this great country of ours that we are losing must understand that we've got to start making the investments necessary to get the truth about freedom into these minority communities. I'm not telling you this is going to be simple, but I am telling you that the work needs to be done and we can make progress. There's no question in my mind that we can make a difference. And in fact, blacks are already showing signs that they know something is wrong. Our phones in my organization are jumping off the hook as record numbers of African-American pastors all over this country had an eye-opener when Barack Obama came out of the closet and told them finally that he is in support of homosexual marriage, as if it was some secret anyway. But other signs that others are seeing that there's something wrong. It's not about the ethnicity of a president, but it's about the worldview of an individual, and that individual then being placed in a position of serving the people. Black flight is one of those signs. The new 2010 census boldly declares and reveals to us that blacks are fleeing these big blue union cities and going to red states in droves. 17% drop in New York City and Chicago, 25% drop in Detroit. Now, of course, this increased my workload because I got to get in these red states and make sure they understand why these states are working, because they're right to work and right to carry, and we want to keep it that way. Another sign of encouragement, at least in particular that community that has been the case study for what doesn't work in liberalism. When we look into what has happened over the last 50 years to this family, once you've collapsed family, you've set education in ruin and you've collapsed the entire community and now determined that that community needs to depend 100% on government. This is what we don't want for the rest of the nation, and we want the black community freed from this heavy hand of government. And what we're seeing are little signs, including in black polling. In 2008, 96% of blacks voted for Barack Obama. In July 2011, his black approval rating was 85%. In February 2012, according to Gallup, his black approval rating was 79%. Not only are blacks for the first time in 50 years trending away from these big government promises, record numbers are now fighting against abortion and for school choice. I'm not making any predictions what's going to happen in the voting booth in November, but I do know one thing: the great work that needs to occur in this country for the future of this country, starting January, we're going to have buy-in from minority communities. And I have to remind people all the time, not only did a Democrat president sign welfare reform into law, we also got school choice in the D.C. school choice program with Democrats in control of Congress. Not that I want them there, but if they are there, we can still force our public opinion to shape public policy so that we'll move public behavior to be consistent with the founding of this great country. Think about your children and your grandchildren. What kind of country are they going to be living in if we don't fight to push back darkness? You know, I have a new resolve because I had my Mr. James. A lot of people know about my little Mr. James because God was just so good to me. I believed the lie of the left so hook, line, and sinker that it wasn't until after the fourth time I went into one of their so-called safe, legal, rare abortion clinics that I had a gut instinct way down deep inside that there must be something wrong with killing your offspring. Maybe I ought to stop going there. And I didn't go there the next time. I had a beautiful little child. That's the one I ended up on welfare with. God transitioned me out. She married young, and now she's having grandchildren for me. You talk about graciousness and mercy from the God above. Have mercy on all of our souls, Lord. Well, she gave me my little Mr. James. And a lot of people know about my little Mr. James, who's 6.5 now. Mr. James, though, when he was 2, I taught him how to color on his parents' wall. And when he was 4, I told him that his daddy, was wrong that he needed a bedtime. That little kids, cute as he is, don't need bedtimes. And he went and told his dad. But now that he's 6, though, he has to go to Catholic school so he could learn structure and order. But they just recently had my little Naomi. She's 9 weeks. Miss Naomi Princess, who I gave a Neiman Marcus card and sent the bill to her parents' house. So my resolve is more than just professional and trying to rescue a people that had such a legacy in this country, to move itself forward, to ask itself deeper questions. Why are we here with the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow? So that they will be the future of tomorrow in America, to go out and maybe save the rest of the world, including all of the nations of Africa. It's bigger than that for me now. I've got grandchildren. And we're at a critical crossroads in this country. Similar to in the 1850s, we can't go on anymore like this. We're right at that point where Abraham Lincoln, during that dark hour before, when we had a big moral question on the table, reached into the scripture. And he said, in quoting the Lord Jesus Christ himself, "A house divided against itself can't stand." And he came up out of that and said, "I don't expect the union to resolve, but I do expect that we can't go on like this, half free and half slave. We're going to be one or the other. We can no longer be both." And that's where we are in this great country of ours, and that's the question in front of us today. We can't keep going like we're going right now. We're exactly split down the middle as a nation. We're going to either be biblical and free, or we're going to be secular and socialist, and that's what's in front of us. So it's time for us to lift up our hearts, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for us to remain steadfast and immovable, to always abound in the work of the Lord. Because in this great country of ours, we still have the opportunity to change course. Because in America, we still hire leadership. In America, we battle in the voting booth. And in America, we have a constitutional right to representative government. And we, the people, still get to decide who those representatives will be. Thank you.